Hi guys, I'm going to be talking about Introduction to Coding Qualitative Data in a World of Big Data. And, oh wait, not touchscreen. My name is Diana. I'm a computer science major. I'm a sophomore, and I'll be talking about qualitative data today. I like video games, data science, and music. So I just recently went to a research conference that was primarily geared towards like computer-human interaction and information retrieval. And so I'm excited to share what I learned at that conference with you guys, because this was at a workshop. So let's start. Oh, by the way, that was me on the Tower of Terror a couple years ago. I was very scared on it, but you know, life is a scary roller coaster, and we can all get through this together. That's just a quick introduction. Anyways, today's schedule, we're just going to go over the introduction to qualitative data. So what is qualitative data? Why do we need it? What's so good about it? And then we're going to talk about how we could code qualitative data. And then we're going to go for some questions. And then we'll have a hands-on activity where you guys actually code your own qualitative data. So let's continue. So what is qualitative data? As we see here, it's just data that approximates or characterizes, right? But it doesn't measure the numerical attributes. So what I mean here is that it's less numerical and just more descriptive. So let's talk about types of data that are used. So we end up using a lot of interviews that have long answer questionnaires, and we look at documents and we define like, oh, what pieces of code do we need to actually analyze this data for a good reason towards my research or your research, right? So what is quantitative data still? Well, it's the thing you use to explore the why questions, right? It's more of an inductive research method. And I'll go into that later, so if you don't know what that is, don't worry. We'll just get into the definitions of those later. But there are many challenges to qualitative research. I want to start with that first, right? Because there's many approaches to working with qualitative data. And I'll also go over that later as well. But there's also little agreement between different people on the same piece of data. So if I had some guy named Rob looking at the same piece of text that I did, we're going to end up coming with different codes for our data. And we might come up with slightly different analyzations of that data. So that's something to keep in mind. It's a little bit hard to get an agreement on that. And another thing is it's very difficult to pin down information, and the work becomes messy very quickly. And you'll see it when you do your hands-on activity yourself. This involves a lot of manual work, so organization will take some time. Because when I say coding qualitative data, it's not you actually programming anything. It's more of you guys sitting down, like looking at a piece of text, underlining it, picking out the important code words, and then putting it into maybe like atlas.ti, which is just some program that that helps you with analyzing your data. So let's continue. Deduction versus induction. So deduction is that like scientific method, the way that most people will do research, and probably if you guys do research yourself, it's the way that you'll do research. And it's this top-down kind of process where you begin with a theory, right? And then you look for your evidence and you make a conclusion out of it. Long story short, that's very like minimized of what it actually is. And then your induction is associated with qualitative research. So you're going from bottom up. You're taking your evidence that you have, right? And then you move from your concrete to abstract. And we'll see more of that later. This is useful for abstraction, classification, and negative cases. So induction is what we will use in our case. I'll come back to this if we have time. So why do we need qualitative data? Let's look at this to find out. This is pretty cute. All right. So there's this bridge usability test. Oh, wait, you guys don't see it. How do I escape?
Is it because like presented? Yeah.
How do I get out of?
Escape on keyboard.
Sorry, help. Sorry.
Wait, you're sure it's not just because of presenter view?
I'm out of the PowerPoint and I don't know where to find it on the Mac.
Here.
Okay.
I don't know how to work it, but.
All right. Control, or wait. How do you, well, I have it open already, right?
Okay.
So, oh, wait, sorry. I don't mean to touch your laptop, my bad. Anyways, so we have this bridge usability test, right? And we see there's this car driving on the road, right? He's like, ooh, pretty view. And he keeps driving and he's like, well, he says that and drives off that road. And he starts screaming, it's all havoc here, and boom. So then in the post-test interview for that bridge usability test, right, he's like, the researcher is like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your bridge experience? And the guy's like, I almost died, my car exploded into a pile of flaming dust, and he just goes off and it becomes a lot more extreme as he talks. And you could tell he's very upset, right? And the researcher's like, but on a scale of 1 to 10, you can tell he's angry. And he just says, I give it a 1. And he's like, okay, well, it's just one test. It's not even statistically significant. So do you see the problem here? Hold on. How do I go back? 3 fingers. Oh, 3 fingers. Oh! Okay. Interesting. All right. Oh! All right. Do we see the problem here? So, the problem here is that we only cared about the statistics. We didn't care about what the user had to say about that bridge, right? Even though it's just one test, does that mean it's not statistically significant, right? So, why do we need qualitative data? Not everything that can be counted counts, nor everything that counts be counted, right? So, of course, qualitative data is not perfect every time, but in these cases, you need it. And in most research methods, people use both qualitative and quantitative. You're not usually just working with only one type of data. And I think that's the best way to do research because, at least in some fields, because you need some statistics, but you also need some understanding of what are those outliers, what are those negative cases in our research that doesn't fit quite right, right? So what is a code? And when we're coding qualitative data, how do we do it, right? So a code symbolically assigns a summative or summative or evocative attribute for a portion of qualitative data. So when you're analyzing your qualitative data, you want to be on a lookout for patterns, similarities, and relationships. But when you first start, you really want to only care about patterns and then make your relationships out of those patterns. So you'll also code for frequency and sequence, which is causation, right? And we want to segment and categorize our data to identify potentially interesting events, features, phrases, behaviors, stages of a process, and distinguish them with labels. And we can see this through many studies. This also reduces our data size by coding our data. So if you have a long block of text, you can just reduce it to like maybe several lines. We can also create ideas and concepts with this that we otherwise would not have seen had we not coded the data. So, but what is a code? And it's going to be a messy situation when you first start out. And you're going to work it on paper usually when you first start out. And you're going to record codes on an Excel sheet. Though I've never done it myself, I just went through a workshop and this is what they told me. So that's how to annoy a qualitative researcher, because objective data doesn't necessarily always mean statistics. But yeah, you're not actually programming anything here, so don't think of code as programming something here. This is manual work. You're manually going to go into your data and mark up important information as you need. For initial coding, you guys are going to be sticking close to your data. So when I hand out this worksheet later, you're going to want to look for simple and short codes. You don't want it to be more than several words long. And you're going to look for actions, and you're going to code line by line. So each line you go through, you have to analyze it specifically on its own. Don't be so concerned about relationships between text yet. Just find what you need. And okay, fine. So I'll show you an example of an initial code, and we'll work with this. I also wrote it here. Whoops. Do we have an eraser? Okay, thank you. I'll just use my hand. The markers. Let me just grab a couple of markers real quick. Okay. So we'll just use these two. So we see, like, when we go through the first, like, I'll say 2 lines here, right? And it doesn't surprise me that after 10 years of early adoptive dematerialization, we see the keywords like adoptive dematerialization, right? And you could just say that people are choosing the virtual, right? Right? And then we see that all the identity work and now seduction of physical objects. So we see, like, there's an identity as a keyword, or as a code, if you want to say it that way, has this, like, oh, there's an attraction of physical objects. So identity between choosing virtual and physical objects. So attract of physical, right? And you'll see the rest down here, right? So as you go down, you see this like pendulum word, and it's this like, oh, we're oscillating between physical and virtual. And then when you continue, you're like, oh, historically, so this has happened more than once, right? This is not the first time it's happening. So what this person is saying here is like, it's this repetitive phase. And you continue, and then you say, oh, well, we're seeing the need for the physical when we see the Etsy maker, right? You guys know of Etsy? So that's the coming back for the need of the physical. And then we see an increase in digital things when here, I think. I'm not sure. Yeah. And then we see a return of the physical back here. So this is how you would like do your initial codes, right? So I'm like, okay, I see this physical thing, or I see this dematerialization. Now I see there's this identity between what's physical that we like, what's virtual. And then we see the seduction of physical objects. So we like material things, right? And then what we want to go into next is, after initial coding, you're going to do a little bit more of like this focused analysis. Do you have the eraser? Oh, thank you. So from those, you're going to make it a little bit smaller, right? And you'll say, so over here, this like section is basically talking about dematerialization. And then the next part, you're going to say, okay, well, there's this physical attraction. And then next you're going to go into this shifting need between the pendulum. So you see here, it's basically a historical like pendulum shifting need. And then finally, you're going to say, well, we're back to physical attraction again, because this basically talks about how we always come back to physical attraction. So we end up cutting down our codes to 4. And you see here that this is repeated twice. Oh, no. Where did it go? I'll worry about it later. Okay, I'll worry about it later. Don't worry. So that's how you do initial coding and then focus coding. So you would initially want to read through all of this once, then start your initial coding, and then do some focused coding into making it a little bit less, make it more concise, basically. So then you're going to make a theme out of that. So out of these like important key concepts from the text that you read, you're going to say, okay, this is going to be more analytical. What am I going to make a theme out of this? So your theme should be able to encompass something important pertaining to the data related to your research. So it can't be like completely unrelated. You want it to be related to what your research is on. And you'll end up using your codes, and this will be analytical rather than being descriptive. So previously mentioned in induction, you're going to increase your level of abstraction. So you're going from concrete evidence to a little bit more abstract. And your data analysis method should be in line with how you're approaching your research. And I'll go into that in a second. So once you make your theme, you're going to say, oh, we're going to say all of this goes into identity rooted in materiality, right? Because we had identity before, and we're going into material things, so physical attraction, right? Does that make sense to you guys? How we went from initial to themes? Okay. So that's an example. You guys are going to create your own codes, and this, when you do this in the real life, it's going to be a lot more time consuming. So be prepared. Like these codes usually take like hours upon hours in like a real life scenario. So we're going to be looking at Genevieve Bell's Humanity's Greatest Fear is about being irrelevant. And I'll pass that out to you guys in a second. And I'd like you guys to, you guys can just pass it around. I'd like you guys to work in groups. So we'll work 10 minutes with the text. And I'll walk around if you guys have any questions. Does anyone have any questions so far? Or? Okay. So what you guys are going to be doing when you start doing this, here's like a little cheat sheet so you know what you're doing. You want to familiarize yourself with the data, so read through it once, do your initial codes, do focus coding, and then review your themes, talk about it with your partners, and we'll come back for a class discussion. So I'm going to stop us all here for a couple minutes. I just want to talk about one thing before like we all start defining our themes. So once you've done your initial coding and your focus coding, you want to analyze data in one way. We're going to talk about thematic analysis, but other ways that you can work with data is qualitative content analysis, which includes like frequency counts, and it's similar to thematic, but thematic doesn't have that frequency type. You could also do this with grounded theory, and this helps for more research with like scientific method theory related work. So like when your work is more deductive than it is inductive. And discourse analysis. And those, we're not going to talk about those today a lot, but we're going to mostly work on thematic analysis, which is just a method for identifying, analyzing, and reporting patterns within our data. So when you look in your data, make sure you find patterns, you find important like key terms that you see repeating, and try to make a theme out of that. So I'll give you guys 5 more minutes for that, and yeah. Let's go into a discussion then. So are there any similarities? What were the difficulties?
The word anxiety comes up a lot.
So what are you saying? Like for these questions, or what's your point?
So like it ties into like the title, like the main theme of the article, which is not. It was just the overall feeling of anxiety of whether we're going to become irrelevant or if we're going to die because of something we created.
Okay, maybe I should have removed that like title so that you guys would like. But it's okay. It's okay. That's fine. So what else did you guys notice that was very frequent aside from anxiety?
Also, there's like a lot of talk about culture, so like different cultures apparently have different attitudes with regards to like
Technology?
with regards to technology.
Okay. So in like a theme, how would you represent that?
It's like some cultures are more tolerant towards some newer things, and other cultures might be a little suspicious or apprehensive about it.
Okay. What's up?
I guess what sort of ties into the whole culture thing is how like certain like media such as movies and such kind of like interpret this kind of thing, because like they mentioned in the article about
All right, so we'll talk about, so I guess in themes we have media, right, and culture with tolerance. And then you were saying anxiety about irrelevance, right? And so what were some initial codes that you guys found, like 2-word phrases that were that came out to you, that popped out to you? Which ones?
Replacing ourselves.
What else?
Fear of the unknown.
Okay. What else?
I guess the role of technology.
Okay. Anything else? Okay. But that would go into fear. But we see it's a repetitive keyword, right? So it's like a repetitive idea, right? So we could like put this into one focus code when we go through our second read through when coding. Anyone who would say any like focus codes? You can keep adding on to initial, but let's start with focused.
I was gonna say something along the lines of like kind of like enabling, because it keeps talking about whether we'll give AI the tools to do something.
So enabling our tech.
Yeah.
What else?
The idea of best versus worst of humanity.
So the best of humanity versus the worst of humanity?
Yeah, which one we're going to give AI or
Okay. Any final keywords, phrases, or themes? With these two, right? Fear. How would we create a theme? Perhaps not using those two, but how would we choose a theme for that? Go ahead.
I said fear of not being exceptional for the theme of this.
Exceptional in what way?
Oh, fear of not being exceptional anymore if we have.
As humans?
Yeah, I think that was about the theme.
So just like replacement, I guess? Fear of replacement. That's fair. So this is basically how you would code your qualitative data when you work with it in your research. And it's not always about numbers, right? This is important to figure out, like for that bridge usability test, like that one person who fell off the bridge, that makes a big difference if you're going to use that bridge or not, right? So in practical situations, we would code at code multiple codes, like much more than probably here. We'd like extensively go in, read it like several times before we even go on to focus codes, and then we would go on to our tentative themes. Data coding can be done both digitally and printed, so you don't have to do it with writing. You could do it on online tools. And we would manage that data that we have in applications like NVivo and atlas.ti, which have a lot of helpful tools for qualitative data analysis and research. So yeah, thank you guys. That's my email if you have any questions. And a big thank you to the person who first presented it to me at my research conference, because it was pretty inspiring. So got me interested. Thank you guys. All right. Sorry.
Good job. It was good. Yeah. Sorry about that.
No, it's good.
Thanks.
It's 6:45.
Oh,
Okay,
I'm
you're good.
very early. It's okay. I like skipping.